Jesus, the Lamb of God, breaks open the first seal. Pick up with me in verse 1 again. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he came out conquering and to conquer. By the way, people always ask me, are there going to be animals in heaven? And I can tell you most assuredly, yes, horses. I can't go beyond that. You want to dispute that, I just point you here. Clearly there's horses. So anyway, what we have here is the rider on the white horse. Now be careful, because often what happens is we look at this and then we read on in Revelation and we get to chapter 19, verse 11, and we see another white horse and we say, well, these must be the same people. They're not. Not at all, not even close. The rider in Revelation 19:11 is the Son of God riding in judgment, but this is a different rider completely. Note a couple of dissimilarities between the two. This rider is given a crown. He's given a crown. A Stephanos crown. Now, if you remember back in chapter 4, we talked about the 24 elders and they all laid their crowns at the at the throne of God in worship. Those were Stephanos crowns. Those were crowns that are basically woven wreaths that you would get for an accomplishment, maybe winning an event in the Olympics, for instance. Those are not ruling crowns. Those are crowns of achievement. I don't suspect that this crown that's given to this rider is even a heavenly gift. I think this is something that's given by man. So they aren't valuable. These kinds of crowns, Stephanos crowns, aren't valuable in and of themselves. They're just some leaves woven together, but they represent something, an achievement of some sort. But Jesus never wears a Stephanos crown. He wears a diademos, a royal crown. In fact, he has numerous diademos. It's a very different crown. So when you see these two things, note, this is not a crown of authority, although there's an achievement apparently involved in this. The rider in chapter 6 carries a bow, but if you'll notice, there's no arrows mentioned in this passage at all. Which means I think what's intended by that is that the rider intends to bring peace. He's carrying the promise of peace. But it's all a lie. How do I know? Well, because the verse says he comes out conquering and to conquer. His very purpose is to conquer. The Greek word there is nikaio in the Greek. It has in mind prevailing, overcoming, subduing, conquering. So with all of that taken together, it seems that this horseman that is coming is promising peace, but it is all a lie, because he's not intending that we should have peace on our own terms. He's intending that we should have peace on his terms, under his rulership, because he comes to conquer. And that is going to match what we'll see eventually in Revelation chapter 13. Do you see how these timelines are kind of overlapping? When the first beast, the Antichrist, comes on the scene. You'll have to wait for that explanation on that when we get to chapter 13. See how I'm keeping you coming back? I am sly, cagey. But in Matthew 24, Jesus says, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Christ." In other words, I am your Savior. That's what that means, I am the Christ. And they will lead many astray. People will come promising great things. And this one apparently is coming promising peace. And he comes to power through a claim, the Stephanos crown. People say, I want you to be in charge. You seem to be a great person. Here, be in charge. Probably because people generally have a desire for peace. It's all innately built into us as the image of God. But he will hold his power through conquering others, which means the peace that he promises is all a sham, every bit of it. It's a false peace. How do I know? Because the very next seal happens. The breaking of the second seal. Verse 3, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. See, this rider's whole purpose is to take peace from the earth, and he's given this sword. The sword, of course, is the opposite of having no arrows. The sword, the whole imagery of the sword is that there is enmity and conflict and open warfare. Peace is lost. Humanity rises up one against another. In fact, this is exactly what Jesus tells his disciples. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. See, great wars and open conflicts lead us then into the next seal, the next horseman, the black horseman. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." Now, we as Americans see scales listed, and we immediately think of that maiden with the blindfold and the scales in her hand, right? That's what we're thinking right now. We think justice, but that's not what's in view here. In fact, what we're talking about here are scales that are there specifically to measure denarius. See, what would happen in the ancient times with the Roman officials, they would print denariuses, and then they would distribute them. Well, the easiest thing to gain a little bit more wealth for yourself is to file off the edges. You ever wondered why a quarter has those ridges on it? It's exactly the same reason. In our money, quarters used to be made of silver. So they put the ridges on the edges so you'd know whether or not it had been filed off. Well, back in those days, they didn't have that system. And so the easiest way to cheat the system was to file off the edges of the denarius. You could distribute the denarius and keep some of the silver for yourself. If you do that enough times, eventually you got a whole bunch more silver, and you melt it down and you trade that. It's a great way to make a profit off of the government. And so the scales were there to make sure that you were actually trading in fair denariuses. It's a lot of S's. And so they would make sure that it was actually the proper weight so that they could give you the proper amount in return. The scale was used to ensure fairness in the trade. But in this context, it means that things are so tight, people will engage in fraud simply to get a meal. Why? Because of what's said. The quote from the center of among the creatures says this, a denarius for a quart of wheat. Now that kind of loses us, right? I mean, number one, we don't trade in quarts of wheat, and number two, we have no idea what a denarius is, other than that, obviously, based on what Pastor Matt just said, it must be some sort of coin. A denarius was basically a day's wage at the writing of Revelation. You'd work all day, you get a denarius. And what that means is that a denarius might buy you enough food for one meal. How do you pay rent after that? You see, it becomes really difficult in this severe, extreme inflation just to live. So that's what it's saying. A day's wage will buy you a single meal, a quart of wheat, or 3 quarts of barley. That'd be 3 meals, but you'd have to eat barley. Kind of chewy, hard to swallow. And so the statement is saying there that there's extreme inflation. And therefore there'd be nothing left for oil and wine. That's why it says, do not harm the oil and wine, because there's no harm that can come to it because nobody can buy it, so you can't consume it. Don't try and play the holder of the scales for a fool. They're not throwing in any extras. It's too expensive. And so what this is describing, as I said, is this extreme inflation, and that means that famine has arrived, as it so often does in times of conflict. So when Jesus opens the 4th seal, it of course reveals to us exactly what we would expect in a period of time in which there's open conflict and famine. Verse 7, when he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. By the way, pale there, we think like somehow some like faint version of maybe gray or taupe or something. It's actually green. The word there is chloros, where we get chlorophyll, the green stuff that makes the energy in plants. It's green. But here I think we should look at it as pale, sickly, rotten flesh kind of green. Ugh. Okay, So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they, Death and Hades, were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. See, here's the aftermath of the previous three riders, death. And the startling reality of this rider is that fully 25% of humanity will be killed. If it were to happen today, that means it would be 2 billion people dead. The numbers are incredibly shocking. It's death on an unheard of scale. So these then are what people have tabbed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You thought they played for the Rams, they didn't. And I think we should probably take these 4 horsemen together as a unit, that together they bring about the catastrophes that we see here in terms of the death that happens. See, the desire for global peace from many quarters will ultimately lead to war and to privation and ultimately to death, just like any major political shift will do. And this will represent the largest political shift in humanity's history ever since Adam and Eve decided that they could govern themselves. But that many killed? Is that even possible? 2 billion? Well, think about it. Chairman Mao Zedong brought the Great Leap Forward to China. By doing that, what he did was he collectivized all of the farms. He moved 3 out of every 4 farmers into the cities so that they could work the steel mills. And as a result, 100 million Chinese died of starvation. That's just one government. Imagine a global government, what that would do. What global reorganization would cause.